Hello students, we are going to talk about side angle side because some people were not able to get to it. So make sure you have this written down in your packet, and we will go ahead and begin some examples using side angle side. So here's our first proof. We have BD is perpendicular to AC and BD bisects AC. We're going to try and prove that these triangles are congruent to one another. Now, the only way that you can use side angle side or side 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 is in your last step where you're proving that the two triangles are congruent. Side angle side does not prove segments, side angle side does not prove angles congruent, and neither does side side side, only when you're proving triangles congruent. So let's go ahead and pause the video, write down your givens. Okay, so I wrote down my givens, and based on what I know that AD is congruent to DC. I have a right angle here. From there, I also know that this is my right angle. And I also know that BD is congruent to BD. So it looks like I'm going to be able to use side angle side. So how do I prove that? Well, let's go ahead and start with the angle first. And I know that angle BDA and angles BDC are right angles. And why do I know that? Because that's what perpendicular means. Two lines being perpendicular, they create right angles. So I'm going to write definition of a right angle. And then from there, I can say that angle BDA is congruent to angle BDC. Because all right angles are congruent. All right, so we got the angle figured out. Now let's talk about BD. BD is congruent to BD because of the reflexive property. And we also had mentioned that AD is congruent to DC, order does matter here, because the definition of segment bisector. Now my final step, I've mentioned a side, I've mentioned an angle, and I've mentioned a side. So therefore, I can say triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD because of side angle side. Okay, let's look at this next example. I want you to pause and go ahead and see what you know, or write down what you know. See if you can get started on this proof. Okay, well, we know R is the midpoint of QS and PT. So what does that mean to be a midpoint? Well, what it means is that it creates two equal segments. So we know that QR is congruent to RS. And we also know that PR is congruent to RT because of that. So what else do we know? Well, it looks like I have my favorite angle here. I have some vertical angles. So now we can say we have a side, an angle, and a side. So let's go ahead and proceed this proof using side angle side. So let's just write down what we know, what we just talked about, what we were brainstorming. So we know that PR is congruent to RT, and QR is congruent to RS. And that's the definition of midpoint. Okay, so we dealt with the sides. The sides are good. Now let's talk about the angles. We know angle PRQ is congruent to angle TRS. We know that these are vertical angles, and we can say that they are congruent to each other because of the vertical angles theorem. And that's in your packet. So now we've set a side, an angle on a side, so we can end on side, angle, side. So we can say triangle PRQ is congruent to triangle TRS because of side, angle, side. Only use side, angle, side and side, side, side. Very last step when you're proving or when you're stating the two triangles are congruent. All right. You guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you Monday.